If you look at the debt clock in Times Square or check the official figures from the U.S. Treasury, you will see a number that defies human comprehension. It is currently spinning past $35 trillion and heading rapidly toward $38 trillion. To put that into perspective, if you stacked $38 trillion bills on top of each other, the pile would reach not just to the moon, but beyond. For decades, politicians and economists have dismissed this number. They told us the deficits don't matter because we owe the money to ourselves, or that the debt is manageable as long as the economy grows. They treated the national debt like a scorecard in a video game, a high number that looks scary but has no real-world consequences. But in 2024, the math changed. We entered a new era of fiscal reality, where the debt is no longer just a number. It is a predator that is beginning to consume the budget of the United States government. For the first time in history, the U.S. government is spending more on interest payments on the debt as spending on national defense. Feel that we're spending more to pay off the bondholders of the past than we are to equip the military of the budget. They are spending more on interest than the entire Medicaid program. The interest bill alone is approaching $1 trillion a year. This creates a terrifying phenomenon known as the debt spiral. In a new household, if you have too much debt, you can spend, pay out, a Cantillon Effect. A given if not a household. A massive approaching U.S. government spending is mandatory, Social Security and Medicare. Is a process made to an aging population that cannot be politically broken, so the government cannot cut spending. Instead, to pay the interest on the old debt, the government has to issue new debt. It is borrowing from a new credit card to pay the minimum monthly balance on the old credit card. This increases the total debt, which increases the interest payments next year, which requires even more borrowing. It is a mathematical feedback loop that leads to exponential growth. The terrifying reality is that there's no conventional way out of this trap. There are only 3 traditional ways to reduce the sovereign debt burden of this magnitude, and 2 of them are politically impossible in the United States today. The first option is austerity. This means limited tax hikes and brutal spending cuts. To balance the budget and stop paying down the debt, the government will have to double income taxes or abolish the U.S. military. Neither of those things is going to happen. Any politician who proposes cutting Social Security checks by 30% commits political suicide. Any president who proposes a 70% tax rate gets voted out in a landslide. The American economy is addicted to government spending. Pulling the plug would trigger a Great Depression instantly, so austerity is off the table. The second option is default. The government could simply walk up to the podium and say, "We are not paying." This is what Argentina or Russia has done in the past. But for the United States, the issuer, the global reserve currency, this is the nuclear option. The entire global financial system, every bank, every pension fund, every trade contract, is built on the foundation that U.S. Treasury bonds are rust-free. If the U.S. defaults, the global banking system collapses overnight. Trade stops, credit cards stop working. It would be a financial apocalypse. So explicit default is also off the table. That leaves only one option. The third option, the option that every empire in history from Rome to Weimar Germany to post-war Britain has eventually chosen, is the path of least resistance. It is the soft default. You don't refuse to pay the debt. You pay every single cent of it, but you pay it back in currency that is worth significantly less than when you borrowed it. You print the difference. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the official, though unspoken, policy of the United States government. It is a process of financial repression designed to transfer wealth from savers to the state. The goal is to keep the interest rate on the debt lower than the rate of inflation. Let's do the math. If the government owes $30 trillion and inflation is 5%, the real value of that debt shrinks by 5% every year. In purchasing power terms, the government has just raised $1.5 trillion of debt in a single year without raising a single tax or cutting a single program. The bondholders get their money back, but that money buys fewer groceries in fewer houses. Disguised as supply chain issues or transitory inflation, we are currently witnessing a historic shift in monetary policy called fiscal dominance. For 40 years, the Federal Reserve was the master. It raised interest rates to fight inflation. It hurt the economy. Today, the Treasury is the master. The debt is so high that the Fed cannot raise interest rates high enough to truly kill inflation, because doing so would bankrupt the U.S. government. If interest rates went to 10% like they did in the 1980s, the interest payments on $38 trillion would be $3.8 trillion a year, more than the total tax revenue of the country. The government would collapse. So, the Fed is forced to tolerate higher inflation. It is forced to keep rates lower than they should be. It is forced to become an enabler of the Treasury spending. The independence of the central bank is dying. We are moving into an era where the money printer is permanently fused to the government budget. This is the hidden crisis. It isn't a sudden crash, it's a slow boil. The $38 trillion number will keep going up. It will hit $40 trillion, then $50 trillion. But the value of the dollar will keep going down. The government is betting that it can inflate away the debt faster than the market companion. It is a dangerous high-wire act. If they print too slowly, the debt crushes them. If they print too fast, they trigger hyperinflation. They're trying to thread the needle, running inflation at 4% or 5% for a decade. This sounds manageable, but the compound effect is devastating. At 5% inflation, the value of your savings is cut in half in 14 years. That is the plan to wipe out half the value of the national debt and half the value of the gains by the mid-2030s. In the next session, we'll break down the specific mechanisms they use to do it. We will explain a yield curve control, the manipulation of the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and how the banking system is forced to buy government debt that nobody else wants. We'll look at the mechanics of the great wealth transfer from Main Street to Washington. To understand how the government plans to make $38 trillion disappear, you need a crystal ball. You just need a history book. We're not in uncharted territory. We are rerunning the exact economic playbook used by the United States after World War II. In 1945, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio hit 119%. The government didn't pay it off with taxes. It didn't default. It liquidated the debt through negative real interest rates. For a decade, the Federal Reserve capped interest rates at 2.5%, while inflation averaged over 6%. Every year, the bondholders lost 3.5% of their purchasing power. This was a deliberate transfer of wealth from savers to the state. Today, this strategy is back. It has been upgraded with 3 modern tools designed to ensure you do not notice the theft until it acts too late. Tool 1. The captive buyer. In free market, if the government has $38 trillion in debt and spending recklessly, investors would demand a higher interest rate to lend them money. They would say, "You were a risky borrower, pay me 10%. But the U.S. government cannot afford 10%, so it rigs the market by creating a captive audience through a complex web of banking regulations, like Bossler III in Dodd-Frank. The government forces banks, insurance companies, and pension funds to hold U.S. Treasury bonds. Regulators designate U.S. Treasuries as high-quality liquid assets, HQLA. Banks are legally required to hold these assets to satisfy their liquidity coverage ratios. It doesn't matter if the bonds pay 0.1% or if they're losing value. The banks must buy them to stay in business. This creates artificial demand. It forces the financial system to lend money to the government at suppressing rates, regardless of the risk. Your pension fund isn't buying government debt because it's a good investment. It's buying it because it's against the law not to. Tool number 2, the broken compass, aka the CPI. If you want to pay people less, but you promise to pay them based on inflation, the easy solution is to redefine inflation. Social Security payments, tips, Treasury inflation protected security are linked to the Consumer Price Index, CPI. Is CPI 10%, the government has to pay 10% more. So, the government has a multi-billion-dollar incentive to keep the CPI low. Since the 1980s, the methodology for calculating CPI has been quietly rewritten to suppress the official number. They introduced substitution bias. The logic is, if the price of steak goes up, you buy steak, you buy hamburger. Therefore, your cost of living hasn't gone up as much as the price of steak suggests. The CPI tracked the hamburger, effectively ignoring the fact that your standard of living has dropped. They introduced hedonic adjustments. If a new car costs $5,000 more than the old model, but it has better safety features, the government argues the price didn't really go up. The price increase is adjusted down because the quality is higher. These statistical sleight of hand saved the government billions. If we use the 1980 methodology today, inflation would consistently be double the official number. The government is gaslighting you about the cost of your own survival to save its budget. Number 3, fiscal dominance. Finally, we have the central bank put. Historically, the Federal Reserve was independent. Its job was to protect the dollar. Under fiscal dominance, the Fed loses its independence. Its primary job becomes keeping the Treasury solvent. When foreign nations like China or Japan start buying U.S. debt, which they have started to do, the Fed steps in, the buyer last resort. It prints money to buy the bonds that no one else wants. This is quantitative easing, QE. By buying the debt, the Fed artificially suppresses the yield. This keeps the government interest bill affordable. That floods the economy with new dollars. The result is that the stock market goes up, real estate goes up, and the price of assets disconnects from reality. This is the everything bubble. It creates the illusion of wealth. Your 401k looks higher, your house value looks higher, but it is a monetary mirage. You have more dollars, but those dollars buy less than they did 10 years ago. The government is effectively paying off its debt by diluting your share of the pie. The verdict: the U.S. government is not going to default. It is going to inflate. It is going to keep interest rates below the real rate inflation for the next decade. Yes, as the silent eraser. You keep your money in insurance account earning 4 per share, while real inflation is 8 per share. You are the one paying off the national debt. You are the donor. The only way out of this system is to own assets that the government cannot print. Serious direct-to-camera. We talked about the government uses inflation regulation to finally seize your wealth. Sometimes a found approach isn't fast enough. When government is too desperate, they stop being so. They simply change the heart to make your wealth theirs. In 1933, the United States government did exactly that. They criminalized the ownership of the one asset that allowed citizens to protect themselves from inflation. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, seizing the gold of every American citizen under the threat of 10 years in prison. In next video, we're going to tell the full, uncensored story of the Great Gold Seizure. We'll uncover the secret prosecutions, the legal loopholes the wealthy use to escape, and the terrifying legal precedent that allows the president to seize your Bitcoin, gold, and 401k during a national emergency. Today, you need to know if your safe is actually safe. Smash that like button, keep the signal alive, and subscribe so you don't miss the history of the gold ban. I'll see you in the bout. We've established that the government is in the debt by raising the value of your money. But this process is not hitting everyone equally. In fact, it is the primary engine of the growing inequality that is tearing the United States apart. To understand why, we have to revisit an 18th century French economist named Richard Cantillon. He observed a phenomenon that is now known as the Cantillon Effect. He realized that where the new money enters the economy matters. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they don't drop it from helicopters over Iowa. They don't mail a check to every citizen. They inject it into the financial sector. They buy bonds from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and BlackRock. These institutions get the new money first. They get zero interest. They use this free cash to buy assets, stocks, real estate, and technology companies. By the time this new money trickles down to the average worker in the form of wages, prices have already risen. The rich get the money before inflation. The poor get the money after inflation. This is why since 2008, we have seen a K-shaped economy. The asset-owning class, the top 10%, has been with explorer because the Fed is pumping up the value of their stocks and homes. The wage-earning class, the buying 90%, has seen their purchasing power collapse as her wages cannot keep up the weight of rent and groceries. The national debt is effectively being paid off by weakening the American way of crafts. The end of the waste-free era. This dynamic is forcing a fundamental change in how we must think about saving. For the last 40 years, the standard advice was work hard, save 10% of your income, put it in a bank, and buy government bonds. This was the 60-40 portfolio. It was designed for a world where money held its value. In world fiscal dawns, this advice is found suicide. If you save in costs, you are guaranteed to lose. If you buy government bonds, you are guaranteed to lose purchasing power. We are entering an era of forced speculation. To simply preserve your wealth, You are forced to take risks. You have to buy stocks, real estate, or crypto just to outrun the devaluation of the currency. The government has turned the entire economy into a casino where you must gamble yourself. It could the safe harbor saying you need to Weverly to sort. The endgame? CBDC. The final tool in the government's arsenal has not been declared. It is currently being built in the basement of the Federal Reserve. It is the central bank digital currency, CBDC. Right now, the government's ability to manipulate the economy is limited by physical cash. If the Fed set interest rates to 5% to wipe out the debt faster, you would simply pull your cash out of the bank and hide it in the mattress to avoid the penalty. Physical cash is the ultimate jet on government power. It lands at the edge of the banking system. A CBDC removes that exit. If the dollar becomes purely digital, the Federal Reserve gains total control. It can implement money into the streets if any. It can deduct 1% from your balance every month to foresee the end. Like an imminent expiry date some money, telling you that your simulstat must be that within 30 days or thanks it. This is not science fiction. It is already being tested in China with the digital yuan. The digital dollar is the ultimate solution to the debt crisis. It gives the state the power to micromanage the velocity of money and confiscate wealth with a few lines of code. The transition to a cashless society is not about convenience, it is about control. It is about ensuring that there is no escape valve when the great wealth transfer accelerates. The verdict? The United States is defaulting. It is a slow, polite, and bureaucratic default. It is a default, nonetheless. The $38 trillion will never be paid back in real terms. The winners will be those who own scarce assets, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, profitable businesses, things that cannot be printed. The losers will be those who trust the currency in the institutions. The American dream, saving our way to prosperity, is dead. We are now in a game of asset to vol. Series, direct to Canada. We've discussed how the government eases inflation in deal control to slowly feed wealth. The history shows that when a government gets truly desperate, it stops being held. They stop asking. They simply take. In 1933, the United States gone, the land of the free, did exactly that. They criminalized the ownership of the one asset that allowed things to protect themselves from inflation. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, seizing the gold of every American citizen under the threat of 10 years in prison. At KU, we tell the full, uncensored story of the great gold seizure. We will uncover the secret prosecutions, the legal loopholes the wealthy use to escape, and the terrifying legal precedent that allows the president to seize your Bitcoin, gold, in 401k during a national emergency today. You need to know if your safe is actually safe. Smash that like button to keep the signal alive, and subscribe so you don't miss the history of the gold band. I'll see you in the vote.